Good morning, Trinity Point Church, and we are so glad that you have tuned in to worship with us again this Sunday. And maybe this is your very first Sunday that you are following us on Facebook or on YouTube with our service. We would love for you to fill out the card, the Connect card. It's going to be in a link below the video. We would love for you to fill that out. We would love to continue to connect with you. This morning, as we begin worship, the last couple of weeks, we have taken time to talk about what it means to sing through the journey of life. And there's good times and there's bad times. And even right now during this season of uncertainty, the fact that we can sing because God is still in control, as difficult as it seems. And so this week I wanted to do something a little bit different. And so I asked a couple of guys who lead as a part of our worship team, Justin and Duncan, if they would just come and to lead us in a song this week. And so we're all going to lead you guys at home this morning as God has stirred our hearts this week, and coming out of that series, sing through it and even what that means. And so we're going to sing with you and worship as we anticipate a time when we can come back together. So wherever you are, I just encourage you to stand and sing with joy and excitement, for Jesus is risen. Let's sing together. I will not be anxious. Jesus, you are near. The peace of God surrounding me, casting out all fear. The hand that holds the heavens is the mighty hand that saves. Voice that calms the stormy seas is calling me by name. I'm singing in the victory of the cross, standing in the shadows, your redeeming love, standing on the promise of new life. I am yours forever. Jesus, you are mine. Oh, Jesus, you are mine. When I have forgotten fullness of your grace, yes, I remember Calvary, when you took my place, and I'm singing in the victory of the cross, resting in the shadows, your redeeming love. I'm standing on the promise of new life, 'cause I am yours forever. And Jesus, you are mine. Oh, Jesus, you are mine. Jesus, you are mine. There is no one like our God, love immeasurable and strong. There is no one like you, God. So lead this heart to sing in awe. I'm singing in the victory the shadows of your redeeming love. I'm standing on the promise of new life. 'Cause I'm yours forever. Jesus, you are mine. Oh, Jesus, you are mine. Jesus, you are mine. I'm singing in the victory of the cross. I'm resting in the shadows of your redeeming love. I'm standing on the promise of new life. 'Cause I'm yours forever. And Jesus, you are mine. Oh, Jesus, you are mine.
I count on one thing, the same God that never fails will not fail me now, will not fail me now in the waiting. The same God who's never late, working all things out, working all things out. Yes, I will lift you high in the lowest valley, and yes, I will bless your name. And yes, I will sing for joy when my heart is heavy in all my days. Yes, I will. I count on one thing, the same God who never fails will not fail me now, not fail me now in the waiting. The same God who's never late, working all things out, working all things out. Yes, I will lift you high in the lowest valley, and yes, I will bless your name. And yes, I will sing for joy when my heart is heavy in all my days. Yes, I will, all my days. Yes, I will. I choose to praise, glorify the name of all names. And nothing can stand against, and I choose to praise, to glorify the name of all names. And nothing can stand against. Yes, I will lift you high in the lowest valley, and yes, I will bless your name. Yes, I will sing for joy when my heart is heavy in all my days. Yes, I will, all my days. Yes, I will. You're the reason I sing, the reason I sing. Yes, my heart will sing how I love you, and forever I'll sing, forever I'll sing. Yes, my heart will sing how I love you.
He's coming on the clouds, King and kingdoms will bow down, and every chain will break, his broken hearts declare his praise. Who can stop the Lord Almighty? Our God is a lion, the Lion of Judah. He's roaring with power and fighting our battles. Every knee will bow before him. Our God is a lamb, the lamb that was slain for the sins of the world. His blood breaks the chains, and every knee will bow before him. Oh, every knee will bow before the Lion and the Lamb. Oh, oh, oh. So open up the gates, make way before the King of Kings. Our God who comes to save is here to set the captives free. Who can stop the Lord Almighty? Our God is a lion, the Lion of Judah. He's roaring with power, fighting our battles. Every knee will bow before him. Our God is a lamb, the lamb that was slain for the sins of the world. His blood breaks the chains. Oh, every knee will bow before him. Oh, every knee will bow before the Lion and the Lamb.
Well, we're so glad that you are joining us online. And I will say at the very beginning, we will have a very important announcement tomorrow. That would be Monday. So please make sure you check as far as social media with Trinity Point Church, our website. We'll be making an important announcement for as far as the future. I'm glad that, again, that you're joining us. I want to read a passage because today is what we call a standalone, and I want you to think, in light of, again, our circumstances, the reality is, and we've said this many times in the last few weeks, the mission of the church never stops, no matter what circumstances are around us. And I'm not just talking about what we've endured over the last few weeks, but and even what the future may look like, we don't know for sure. Whatever the circumstances are, the church, the mission of God does not change. And a lot of times when the things around us get more difficult, it's almost like the mission of the church even intensifies as far as focus and impact. And so that's what I want to continue to remind you of it. And what we say is that we want to see the world changed by Christ. But we want to see that happen one life at a time. And then we want to do that through making biblical disciples. Seeing those disciples made over and over again. We do that through relational environments. And we do that from a biblical standpoint. This is the way Jesus did it. This is the way that we want to do it. And so I want to read a passage, and this is right out of a story that we're very familiar with if you grew up in church. If you did not grow up in church, I encourage you to read this story, or even if you did, read the story of Zacchaeus and Jesus. Zacchaeus, tax collector, what we call maybe an outsider outside the religious system, was hated by the people that Jesus, as far as Jewish people, that's Jesus was a Jew. And because of a lot of tension there, I won't get into all of that, but just a lot of just relational tension with tax collectors and Jewish people. And Jesus was walking through a town. Zacchaeus was longing to see Jesus. We would call him vertically challenged. And so he climbed this tree and to see Jesus. Jesus saw this hunger in him amongst all the crowd and said, Zacchaeus, come down. I'm going to your house. Zacchaeus puts his faith in Jesus, and then you see this statement that Jesus says based on that story. In Luke 19, he says this, for the Son of Man, that's Jesus, came to seek and to save the lost. One of the things that you and I need to be reminded of as the church, that is Jesus. He came to seek and to save and lost. So when we align our lives to Jesus, when we become Christ followers, then that should be our mission as well. And I don't know what you have how God has stirred your heart through this time in the last few weeks. But one of the greatest ways that we can do that today is very simple. It's just being a good neighbor, literally. And one of the things that we're going to do, even as a focus for our church, next week is Mother's Day, and that'll be another standalone. We're going to focus on how God has given us the gift of motherhood, even biblically. But after that, we're going to put even more focus on this idea of neighboring. Listen, over the last few weeks, I've probably had more conversation with my neighbors, the little cul-de-sac that I live in, than I've had over the last 6 months. And it's not because we didn't have a relationship with our neighbors. We've already had those friendships over the last couple of years. But because of what we're dealing with now, people being, maybe not working or working in their homes, we're having a lot of interaction with our neighbors. And I'm praying for our neighbors. I long to see more and more our neighbors understand the grace of God. We're going to put a strong emphasis in our church. This is one of the ways that the mission of God can be a focus in our local body more than any other time. And so I encourage you to think about that. And it may be just starting with this. And this is so simple. Do you actually know the names of your neighbors? Think about that. Do you know their names? Okay, don't feel guilty if you don't, but I do want to challenge you with an assignment. In the next week or two, learn their names. It's that simple. And so we'll talk about that more and more. I'm excited today to introduce a guy that I've known for a good many years. It goes even back to when he was in college and I was doing college ministry in Spartanburg. His name is Chris Lanier, and Chris is going to share some of his story today. He is going to be planting a church in Denver, Colorado, and he's moving his wife, Jesslyn. They were actually dating when I first met him when he was in college, and now they have 4 kids. He's going to share some of his story, and even how this seeking to save those who are lost, but not just seeking to save those who are lost, is developing them as they become Christ followers to make disciples who will make disciples. He's planting a church there in Denver. So I want you to hear some of that story. I want you to meet Chris. Chris, thanks so much for taking the time to be here. And for those, again, I want you to maybe even share, Chris, about some of your story. I know, we met, I was trying to think the year, it had to have been, I went there in 2005.
Okay. I remember being there as you came in.
Yeah.
James was the leader.
That's right.
He went off
That's right.
overseas as a missionary.
Yeah.
You came in.
So I was, they call it the BCM, Baptist Collegiate Ministry, there in Spartanburg, and I worked with the 5 campuses. There's 5 schools there, and you were a student in 2005, and
right.
then I met Jesselyn at the time, and that now is his wife, and they were dating. One of the things that kind of reunited us is even your journey, and you're going to talk about that some with Awaken Church, but a lot of that is this philosophy that we talk about, and I mentioned earlier about making disciples, and even how much that was a part of, that was Jesus' ministry. I mean, there's no plan B.
Yeah.
And potentially how the church over the last, 20, even 50 years, maybe has gotten a little off focus there. And so one of the things that we have really tried to say here is, let's try to understand where people are and then pray they take the next step.
Yeah.
Now, when you came in, even as a college student, and I've told you this before, it's almost like people are just kind of drawn to you. You had this ability to lead, and I saw that even then. And I don't even know how much you remember about that, but in some ways I would push you a little bit, even in that ministry, and say, man, Chris, there are people who are following you, your impact. Now, you weren't out doing crazy stuff. A lot of college students were doing at the time, but you weren't really focused either.
Not quite on the pace I should be on as a college student.
I mean, the dude was unbelievable. A frisbee guy, as far as the ultimate frisbee, I do remember that. Yep. But if you had a major in ultimate frisbee, you would have had a 4.0 there.
That'd have been good.
but I bring that up to say, one of the things I've learned in ministry, I think, and I'm still, is that we should not pigeonhole people to where they are at the time, and then give up on them.
Yes.
Because when we talk about this disciple will, a lot of times we use in our model, and it's not unique to us, Real Life Ministry, and that's a
Same
ministry,
with us, yeah.
Is, talk about just briefly, that you're dead, spiritually dead, a spiritual infant, a spiritual child, and then a big step when you take that spiritual adult, that you really begin to own ministry, and that moves you to where now you want to invest in others, which is a spiritual parent.
Yeah.
I would probably say back then you would have been in that spiritual child, possibly. You were going to church, all of that.
Life was more about me, which puts me right there where a child would be spiritually.
Well said. I think for me as a leader, I have to go, man, I can't just give up on people if that's where they are. And because here's the beauty of that story, and I want you to tell that. Why don't you do that? Out of college, and then how God stirred your life to where, even bring us up to maybe where you are now.
Well, first I want to say thank you for the opportunity to be here. Tracy Tracy was a huge influence even on my life back in college, like we're saying. And I got to see this relational discipleship. He would spend time. It wasn't just he'd show up to preach a sermon or show up to lead a conference, things like that. He would spend time investing. That's how he knows I could play Frisbee. We would play Frisbee together.
That's right. I wasn't near as good as him, but good night.
There was these life-on-life deposits over and over. And I've loved seeing that in him and others that have influenced me. A lot of my story, as he's referencing in college, I got off track. I was privileged to grow up in church, had faithful parents that took me to church and taught me about Jesus. I gave my life to Jesus at a young age. As I graduated high school, went to college, started this journey, I thought I was going into ministry, and really it turned into this long side road that God had for me to teach me a lot of things. I spent a lot of years in college where I would go and attend, I would fail out, I would go back, I would drop out, and it was in this season where I kind of met Tracy. So Tracy saw what he's saying, potential in me, leadership potential in me, which I love hearing that from someone who was one of my leaders, but was kind of wasting a little bit. I was wasting maybe that potential the Lord had put in me as I was not following him with all of my passion, following him with all that he had given me. And this long journey of going back and forth finally got me back into ministry. A church took a chance on me, gave me an internship. I got to work alongside a wonderful guy named Brandon Bowers, who we moved to Charleston together to help plant Awaken Church. And Awaken Church is about 8 years old now. And one of the major philosophies of ministry that has helped shape us at Awaken is this idea of relational discipleship. And one of the things you just said, the idea of people moving around this spiritual wheel, which I love hearing y'all use that. The Awaken uses it the same way, and I know many churches around the world do as well. It's this understanding that we don't get stuck. We don't get pigeonholed, as you said, as to where we are. And thank the Lord that we don't. Because I know that I've needed investment to move myself around this wheel in spiritual maturity, to see my role, my personal role, to be a disciple maker of Jesus and to make disciples of others. That's a responsibility that I feel the Lord has given me, and in fact has given all of us. And Awaken really blossomed and began to grow when we understood that idea. That it wasn't people were going to show up to see a show, to see a sermon, to hear worship songs. That was going to be part of it, but they were going to continue to come as we made disciples and then trained them, move them along that wheel, if you will, to then make disciples themselves. And so for us, the same way that I was given 1, 2, 3, 100 chances as I grew, maybe you've had the same number of chances given you where you've messed up. I was able to see people that were, for instance, in my small group, a guy named Justin, who's actually a pastor on staff at Awaken now. He was someone that was in one of my first small groups at Awaken that I led. And there was this moment where as the church was really first starting, when we kind of stumbled upon this concept. We met some guys from northern Idaho, about as far away as you can go. But it's this great church, Real Life Ministries, that kind of helped teach us. God puts people on our path, I believe, to teach us along the way, whether we're looking for it or not sometimes.
Absolutely.
And as they showed us that, it was really this understanding of like, man, we've got people, and church is not a spectator sport. We want to put people in the game. We want to give people a place to play, if you will. And so for me, the understanding of ministry I might have kept this guy, Justin, sitting in the pew, sitting in the seat, and he would have watched me do ministry. He would have watched me lead. And sometimes that can feel good. But it was this challenge of like, hey, I want people to, when they see me, to not think, man, I'm so glad we got Chris. I want them to think, I could do that. I could lead that. I could facilitate that. I could make disciples. And it was that kind of flip that changed it for me. I wanted a guy like Justin and many others after him to get this like, man, I can do that. I'm actually supposed to do that. God's equipped me to do that. And I remember when we first branched out our small group, it went from one group to 2 groups. And Justin took over and was the leader, him and his wife, Brittany. And we knew that there would be stumblings and slip-ups and questions, and there were. But it was this phenomenal thing that we've started to witness, in that God was raising him up as a leader himself. And again, like I said, he's now on staff at Awaken Church as a pastor who's gotten to know the Lord, was baptized, led groups, coached groups, has led in ministry, and God has done an amazing work in his life. I think because we gave him an opportunity to move forward in ministry, to step up into the game and not just watch.
Man, that's so rich, so good, and it's so encouraging. And that's the other thing about ministry and the Holy Spirit and trusting God in this process is, if we do give up on others, then you may not see what you could see. And that's the other thing that I think Chris is a great example of that, but also the guy he invested in. And I even believe when we talk about the Gospels, and even talk about the first team, that first group of 12 guys, Jesus saw what they could be. He never saw or let them settle on where they were. He saw what they could be. And so I think that's what we have to even think of. That's the essence of the church, is that we, as God brings people into our lives, we need to say, God, what could they be? And then see God shape and mold and move. You see, there's story after story at Awaken. I will tell you this. I've had the privilege of knowing Brandon for a good many years as well. The guy that you planted with. Were there 9 people of you? 8 years ago. I wanted you to say how God's blessed. How many small groups are going now? How many campuses? What God has done even in that 8 years.
So it's really been a work of God. It's been miraculous along the way. Sometimes you can get lost in the details, having seen it go from 9 to over 1,000 people now, 8 years in. There's 2 campuses, about to be a third. There's one in Somerville, which I love that. The Awaken Somerville is pastored by Stephen Lodeholt, which is a guy that I got to lead to Jesus several years ago. And again, a similar story to Justin I was just referencing. Got into God's Word, understood what it meant to be a disciple, began to see his role, rose up and led a group, coached multiple groups. Eventually was like, man, this guy's got to be on staff. This guy's got to be leading. And now he's a pastor, and he's leading the whole campus. And there's about to be a downtown campus that's starting up this year.
Yeah. Well, and I will tell you this, Chris. I was at, when you call them immersions or whatever, DS1s, I was at one a few years ago. And it was one of Stephen Lodeholt's, one of his first ones that he actually attended as far as outside of.
Okay.
And so he starts sharing his story. And I'm just I can't remember the context. He talks about this guy named Chris that's invested in him. Of course, I knew you were on staff. And then he goes, yeah, Chris Lanier. I was like, are you kidding me? I mean, that's when I went unbelievable. So, the Chris that I knew in college, and I knew that you were leading in that context, but it was so encouraging for me personally to go, now this guy's leading leaders. So he invested into, and of course, Stephen Lodeholt's story.
Oh, man.
He's like, not that he was vertically challenged, but I'm saying he's like a Zacchaeus. He is.
Oh, yeah.
When you think of lostness, this guy was way out there. God,
Steve,
radically.
We love you, Steve.
Yeah, we do, man. Hopefully he's watching. Radically changes his life. Now he's a pastor at the church. That's what you long for over and over again. Now, so God shaped and molded you even as a leader, because I know talking to you and then talking to Brandon, it was almost like baptized by fire, meaning you guys are learning how to lead. You're learning the different stages of as far as how God is blessed with people. Mm-hmm. Your roles have changed different along the way, but it's still that same philosophy: make disciples.
It was
raise
that,
up leaders.
Yeah, it was that learning, that initial understanding. The challenge was to be a disciple maker. We had to accept the role. I had to accept the role that was who God had called me to be. For me to be a disciple maker. So as we were like, hey, this sounds great. What kind of programs and small group ministry and what kind of stuff can we start so that our church gets it, which is like the wrong question to ask altogether. I had to accept this responsibility that God had made me to be a disciple maker. So just like Tracy was asking earlier about who's your neighbor, I began to have to ask that question, who am I discipling? Who that's lost, that doesn't know Jesus, that doesn't come to church, do I have a relationship with? And as I had to be forced to answer that question, I had great pastors and leaders in my life that would ask me those tough questions. And maybe that's a tough question for you today. Who's someone in your life that you're discipling? Or who's discipling you? It's a personal relationship thing. And for me, I had to embrace this role that God had called me to be disciple maker. And then as I did that with a circle, that could then work its way out and begin to affect the church as other people bought into this idea that they are also disciple makers. Just like what Jesus did, like he said, with his 12 disciples. He saw more for them than they could see for themselves, but he spent such an amount of time investing in them, knowing that, hey, eventually he's going to be leaving, and he's going to give the mission of the church to them.
Yeah, talk about, we all use the same definition of a disciple, and it's based on that Mark 4:19. And I even think in our conversation, you see that played out in your life as far as, talk about that. I want
Matthew 4:19,
yeah.
Jesus comes and tells his disciples, it's basically broken down into 3 parts. Come follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. And so if we're going to be a church, if we're going to be people that make disciples, we got to kind of have a definition that's clear, especially as we understand it and then as we communicate it to others. So as we look at that verse specifically, it starts with Jesus saying, come follow me. So number one, there's this decision to make. Am I going to follow Jesus or not? Am I going to go where he's going or am I not? And also there's this idea of it's ongoing.
It never stops.
It's not a name tag you put on, a box you check. It's a decision that you really make every day as you're following Jesus. And so as you follow Jesus, the one thing that he says is, and I will make you fishers of men. So there's this part where Jesus is going to be making us into something that we aren't quite yet there. So there's change that comes. And for me, that was a lot of what Tracy experienced in my own life. And maybe you've had that in your own life where you grew from a place from one point to the next in maturity in Christ. And that's part of the following of Jesus. That's on the journey that we have. I'm going to make you, I'm going to change you, I'm going to work on you. So like for me, I need to look more like Jesus now than I did last year, than I did 5 years ago. And that's actually one of the questions we had often asked people in our group, and they would ask us, hey, how do you look more like Jesus now, today, than you did last year?
Oh, that's good.
Sometimes it seems like a simple question, but it's very difficult to answer. What am I learning? What am I growing? How am I changing? How am I better at forgiving or loving those that are different than me, or all those kind of things that are challenging? How am I different now than I was? And there's this final thing, I'm going to make you fishers of men. So come follow me and I will make you fishers of men. So there's this initial call into the mission at the very beginning. That's near where Jesus is just calling them.
That's right.
It's not 10 years down the road when it's like, okay, now you can get into ministry. Now you can start making disciples. That's from the initial call. Come follow me and I will make you fishers of men. So we know that we're joining in the mission with Jesus, coming right alongside him to be fishers of men, fishers of our neighbors.
That's right.
It's how do we know our neighbors' names? Do we know people's names? Or we can actually have a relationship with them where they see Jesus in us, and that leads them to ask those questions that hopefully leads them to church, but definitely leads them to a relationship with Jesus.
Which is a great kind of segue to think about even what I read at the beginning when Jesus said, I came to seek and to save those who are lost. That's that I'll make you fishers of men. So I'm calling you to do what I have done. And so you're at Awaken 8 years in, you have a full-time salary, you're married to Jessalyn, you have 4 kids, and then now you have this calling to go and plant, leave your comfort, kind of the South has been where you're from, Spartanburg, Charleston, that mainly, and then now God's calling you to go to a whole new culture, Denver, Colorado, to plant a church this summer.
This summer.
It's May right now.
That's right.
And you're talk about that.
It was around a year ago when I began to feel this tug, and it was essentially asking the question of, what is God preparing me for? What has he been preparing me for? What's my next season of ministry? What does that look like? And I began to feel this call to be a pastor, this call to be a shepherd. God had put me under a tremendous pastor with Brandon to learn from and to watch him lead and preach and lead leaders and cast vision. And I'd worked alongside some amazing staff. I've mentioned Stephen and Justin. There's tons of others that have inspired me, that have motivated me, that have taught me really. And it was in that season where God started to say, Chris, I have something that I believe is more for you. I have something that's next for you that I've been preparing you for. And I've been in this season. Awaken has taught me so many things. It's given me so many opportunities, and it prepared me for what God was calling me to do next. We really began to feel this burden and me and Justin both, for what is next for us in ministry. And we started to open our eyes and look around, and we started to see all these places around the world, really around the United States, that were in such desperate need of churches. in such desperate need of Christ followers that were going to go make an impact, make a difference. And Denver was one of the ones that came up on our list. There was a few cities that actually came up as we began to pray about what is the need. Because for us, we wanted to go where the need was. We wanted to go where there was a need. And that was what I wanted my legacy to be. And so as we started to look, we asked the Lord, God, we would love a sign. I don't claim to be the smartest guy. And Lord, you got to show us. Give us some signs. And as we had Denver on our list, there was just sign after sign. We had friends that went to Denver randomly. We had other friends that went to a work conference there. We had another friend that went. We met people at the park that had just moved from Denver. There was just 5 or 6 Denver stories, one after the next after the next. And we said, Lord, I think this is you talking to us. We believe that this is where you're leading us. So I sat down. I talked with Brandon Bowers, with my pastor. We kind of got a plan together. Me and Justin flew out to Denver, met with some pastors there that I have been able to connect with, kind of navigated, learned the area, and really felt this burden that, like, this is it. This is where I'm sending you. This is where I'm calling you to be. And even as we learn and study, 93% of that area unchurched.
Yeah.
93 out of 100 aren't interested in church, aren't interested in Jesus. And that seems like a very daunting number, very high number, and it is. It's a very post-Christian area. There's some great churches there that are doing tremendous work that I hope to learn from and work alongside. But I know that the need is great. And so the things that I've learned here, I'm honestly not in a search to go get a platform and have a big sermons and all that kind of stuff. I think that will come. I pray that will come. But I know that my goal is to go there and to meet my neighbor, to meet my realtor, to meet the person at the gas station, to meet my neighbors and learn their names and begin to develop relationships and begin to point people to Jesus the same way that I've been pointed to Jesus myself. So that was this burden of man, God has used this tremendous season the last 8 years at Awaken, which I didn't deserve to be there in the first place. God had saved me. God had brought me out of a place undeserving, which I think is how God works, and put me into this leadership position to where I've been able to see tremendous blessing come behind me, to been able to lead people to Jesus. I used to would have hung my hat on things that I knew, on being able to write a paper about a certain doctrine and theology, to do a debate. Those are the things that I was interested in, and I still am interested in those things. But that's not what I hang my hat on anymore. Now I'm able to look and see, here's the guys, Stephen and Justin and Ryan and John, and the list that the Lord has allowed me to be able to lead people to Jesus. That's what I want to do. And then guys like Stephen, who've led so many others to Jesus.
Right.
That is the ultimate fulfillment that I didn't fully understand until just these last few years.
Wow.
I get to invest in someone else. I get to disciple someone else and then see, now they are doing the same thing.
And we long for that more and more here, is to see people, not only lead them to Christ, but now they lead ministries. That's I go back to Stephen, that's his story. And I will tell you this too, you guys, if you're part of our local body as far as Trinity Point, kind of our DNA has been, as God brings church planters into our lives, we want to, in some ways, encourage them and say, we believe, especially those who are going to hard places, meaning where you're such a minority. We really want to get behind that as best we can. Many of you know Ivy Roads in Boston, and that's a similar type of place, meaning the Northeast and the Northwest, it's different cultures, but a lot of the similarities as far as just people aren't going to church, and there's so much lostness. Mm-hmm. And Chris knows this, but I don't know that I've shared this with our church family. Michelle and I, in 2000, I think it was 2000, Caroline, our youngest biological at the time, our youngest biological child, 6 months old, and I had 3 other kids. We sold a car and took a trip out to Denver, really believing that God was stirring us to plant a church there.
That's awesome.
And so, that was 20 years ago. And it didn't work out at the time. And that's the other thing. You can't force these things. It just didn't work out. But God put a real strong burden in my heart for Denver. So now, 20 years later, college student, we met, Jesselyn and Chris as they were college students, and to see God do now in them, and they're actually doing it. You know what I mean? You guys are actually moving there. And that's the other thing, and we'll kind of wrap up with this. You're planting a church in the midst of COVID-19. And you and I talked, and even on the phone about a week ago, and I even asked, I said, does this push it back?
Right.
And tell them what you told me.
I've gotten some great encouragement along this process. The last 8 weeks for all of us have been probably the most interesting season of our lives. Very, very different, where a lot of us are home all day. Our kids are out of school. Some of us have lost jobs. Some of us have even lost loved ones. And it's just been this weird emotional season of like, when do we start back, and how long do we wait, and what does this mean financially for things? And all this has been this exact season for us while we're trying to prepare and build and launch out to start a church. So I'm kind of asking the Lord over and over, what are you telling me something? Did I miss a signal at some point? Or what does this mean for us? And honestly, the more I've been able to sit still, to listen, to spend time with God, I've felt this understanding, this overwhelming sense that this is the right time. This is actually something that's laying the groundwork. There's people everywhere that are asking questions that maybe they've never asked. Is there a God? What is life about? People are missing community. They're feeling isolated. They're dealing with sicknesses and challenges under quarantine, and people are ready to experience something, I believe, that they weren't open to maybe 8 weeks ago. And so when it's like, hey, is this the right time? Like, is it a challenge? Yes, there's challenges, and there's going to be more challenges as we go. I know there will be. But this is like the ultimate runway where God says, this is actually the right time. This is actually the right time to do it, and I'm setting the stage for the harvest to be plentiful. And I want to send a laborer into this area where it's desperately needed. And so, yes, there's challenges with COVID-19 and working on financial partnerships and connecting with other ministries and all the things, building a team. But one great story, we had a family that just joined our team that's going to be moving out to Denver with us. And they were kind of thinking through it, and it's been amazing. As we announced it, we actually never went to ask anybody to come with us. As the announcement was made, Pastor Brandon at Awaken was generous to say, hey, if you feel led to come, go. If you feel led to go, go.
So Pastor Brandon says to the people in Charleston,
oh yeah,
you feel as a family led to move with Chris, I want you to go.
Please go.
Love that.
He's always led with open hands, and it's been inspiring to me. I want to lead the same way with open hands. I think the moment we try to hold tight and think it's ours somehow, that then we get messed up.
Yeah.
And he's led with open hands. And since then, there's been several families that have said, we want to go. And there's one family in particular, they just decided about 2 weeks ago that they were going to come with us. And I was kind of nervous, wondering, like, with all this going down with COVID-19, are they going to pump the brakes or say, maybe this is a bad idea, or this is a bad sign? And this guy came to me and he said, you know what, it was actually this pandemic and the unforeseen future that maybe is in front of us, the uncomfortableness is actually what led me to say yes. He said, I tend to stay in my comfort zone. I tend to want to be comfortable. And we were praying through, should we go or not? And actually, we started to feel like, you know what, to move there would be comfortable. We like the area. It's going to be great. And some of the uncomfortableness started to shift away. This actually brought it back. And he said, because of that, I want to go. And that's just inspired me. And that's I get pumped up just talking about it. I love that the Lord is aligning people's hearts to come together to go into this area and to work where he's already there. We're not taking Jesus to this area. Jesus is there. But we get to come alongside him there and make disciples of Jesus in that area.
Well, I can't tell you how that encourages me, Chris. I mean, on many levels. And so what you just said as you wrap this up, what we've been trying to say for the last few weeks is that the mission of God does not stop. What you just said and the actions that you're putting forth with a wife and 4 small kids moving across country in the midst of this COVID, that's exactly a great example. And again, that's what God calls us to be uncomfortable. He calls us to those things, and it's to use wisdom and all that. I get it, but that's why I'm so excited for you, Chris, because God does his greatest work in the midst of that at times. And that's what I want even the local bodies of people to see. that we are not called to live in fear. We're supposed to be wise as best we can, but God calls us to go sometimes right in the midst to face our fears and follow as He leads. And that's what I see in you and Jesselyn and your 4 precious kids. So I want to even have a prayer right now for you and to Jesselyn. I know because my wife Michelle, we had 4 kids now. We have a couple more, but at this stage, I pray for you. I pray as much for Jesselyn because I know, you know what I mean?
Yes.
That I, because of my Michelle, it's not easy, but we're not called to easy, are we?
No way.
So,
No way.
so let me pray for you, and we'll kind of wrap up. Father, thank you so much for what an incredible story of grace in Chris's life, in Jesselyn's life. I even think about Jesselyn, the heritage of faith that she has in her family, Chris's family, the many, many leaders that have invested in Chris over the years, especially Pastor Brandon and others there at Awaken. And Lord, I just pray that you will continue to give encouragement, that you'll continue to give him faith over fear, that you'll already, I truly believe you're already preparing people's hearts that where they're going and where they're moving. And I thank you for that you're going to give him neighbors, even but I already believe that you are touching those neighbors' hearts through your Spirit, preparing them. Lord, thank you. Lord, this is in your design way before you ever called us. And so I trust you and believe that you're doing a great work. Thank you that you've introduced us to Chris and Jesselyn, and even through this brief time we've had today, Lord, stir our family, meaning TPC, stir their hearts, even to generosity, so that we can even more give to families like this that are going and trusting God to move across country, so that we can see a glimpse of what you're doing, again, one life at a time, all for your glory, through your Son Jesus, we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Tracy, so much.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. And thank you, Trinity Point.
Well, I hope that you were encouraged as much as me. It's just a beautiful story of God's grace and then calling even in the midst of sometimes chaos. And can I just say, family of Trinity Point Church, that's just who we are. We want to get behind people and families that are willing to take that step of faith and follow God on behalf of His mission. And so you're going to hear more about some possibilities as far as us getting behind what Chris and how God is calling his family out there to Denver. But also, I do want to say thank you for your generosity over the last few weeks, your continued generosity. It just shows, even it's a great example that you continue to give even in the midst of chaos, and to see how God can work in the midst of that, and even in opportunities like this with Chris and his family. So thank you for your giving. We would challenge you and ask that you will continue to do that. We were this past Monday with Samaritan's Purse helping with the tornado victims there in Seneca, and just reminded how God is using Samaritan's Purse to take the mission of God, especially in hard places. And that's what He's doing in His local body. But it takes people who are willing to say, I'm willing to continue, hands open, God, through generosity. And that moves the mission of God forward over and over and over again. And so thank you. Listen, these are days where we could see a movement of God like we've never seen before. And that's what I'm praying for, even for Trinity Point Church. So thank you for your generosity there. And then to hear about this Art of Neighboring. It's a book by Dave Runyon. And now you're going to catch this, who is from Denver, Colorado. And already we're trying to connect him with Chris because, again, this is what God is doing. Just to be a neighbor of good news of God's grace, whether it's in Easley or in Denver, Colorado. So thank you for your faithfulness there. With that being said, just as you're seeing Chris and the Lanier family sent to Denver, so you are every single day. Trinity Point Church, you are sent.